Everything that we've been doing here on stage is online. It'll be, the first 2 days are already online. Today will be online later this afternoon, but if you go back to the agenda for this show, click on any of the sessions. It'll link you directly to the video. There's a lot of follow-up reporting as well at MediaPost.com. And of course, Toby right here is our editor who covers all things programmatic. If you want to talk to and does it very well, she can get a round of applause. Go right ahead. So if you're interested in following up with Toby for further stories, grab her online. You can click on her online. So I wanted to please welcome Christian Basler, who is the president of Bauer XL Media. Christian, I've interviewed Christian a number of times over the years. I've been very impressed with what they've been doing at Bauer, and I wanted to interview him here within the context of this show for several reasons. He worked for 4 years at Bauer over in Hamburg. He was a freelance writer, a photographer for a while, but then worked on the web development team. He helped grow their digital business very quickly, came over here in 2012, and in just the last several years has really led the charge at Bauer to grow their base from pretty much a standing start of 1 million uniques to now you're up to 25 million. Is that correct? 25 million in just a few years. All of it organic growth. All of it through careful and clever leveraging, especially of social platforms, where they have a huge presence. And we're going to talk in a second, for those of you who are not familiar with the properties, because a lot of you may not be in the demo that Bauer tends, a lot of Bauer properties aim at. We'll go through the properties and talk about each of them for a second. But this is really a very data-driven content story. In many ways, it's the media side of the programmatic story. He leveraged social channels very effectively and used analytics, not only to help guide the editorial, which was attracting a lot of that audience, but then convert that audience from the usual flyby traffic that social tends to produce for publishers and turn them into brand loyalists. So it's a traditional media company that leveraged digital very wisely, but also put at its core programmatic. In my coverage of publishers and programmatic, just going back 4 or 5 years, on stages just like these, we had many media companies who sort of edged gently into programmatic, and then in many ways were pulled in kicking and screaming, mainly because agencies that they were dealing with demanded it. But just 4 or 5 years ago, many publishers still aligned programmatic with remnant and saw it as a tremendous threat to their core business models and their core value proposition, especially as building media context. But one of the unique things about Bauer is it put programmatic at the center of the media of its business model, and it's grown a lot of its business and its monetization strategies mainly through programmatic advertising. And we're going to be talking about that and the lessons that Christian's experience brings for media buyers, and that's why I have him here. Christian, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about the Bauer properties. Why don't you walk us through what they are, who they're aimed at, and we'll drill into some of the details of these audiences.
Sounds great. To start off, I think it would be helpful to talk a bit about our parent company, Bauer Media Group. It's the largest magazine publisher in Europe and Australia. We have around 1,000 brands worldwide. We're also the largest radio operator in Europe. And in addition to that, we also have some TV channels, mostly in the UK, and we also have our own distribution plans and our own shipping plans. And overall, we have around 11,000 employees in 20 countries and around 2.5 billion in revenue. So as you can see, it's a huge company that has a lot of footprint internationally and a lot of established brands that have different business models, from a newsstand model on print to an advertising model and a subscription model in print in certain territories like the UK as well. So there's a lot of diversity and there's a lot of complexity around the audiences and the brands we have. In terms of the US portfolio, here are some of the bigger brands that you may know of if you're in a target demographic. In Touch Weekly, for example, is one of our celebrity titles. Life and Style is in the same category. Then we have Woman's World, which is actually the best-selling magazine in the US on newsstands. So if you go to airports or to supermarkets at these checkout lanes, we sell more magazines of Women's World than any other publisher sells of any other magazine. And First for Women is number 2. So we have the top 2 magazines in the US selling at retail, at newsstands. In addition to that, we have a variety of teen brands, the biggest being J14, which is basically the teen version of InTouch, very much teen celebrity gossip and celebrity news. We have Twist, which is kind of the more affordable version of Teen Vogue, meaning we actually talk about fashion that teens can go and buy, not the aspirational fashion. And then we have M, which is for the 10 to 12-year-olds, giving them advice on growing up and dealing with their friends and family.
Most of these are digital native brands. I mean,
Exactly.
You have a core of traditional media brands, but then out of that, you've spun off a number of digital native brands.
That's right. So for example, at the bottom right, you can see Recipes Plus. That's one of our first international efforts where we had a big portfolio of recipes based on all the magazine content that we've been producing over the past few decades. And with Recipes Plus, we took all of that recipe content internationally from the 20 countries, put it into one big database, and now made it available digitally. And as you can imagine, it was a huge undertaking because all the differences in ingredients not being available, and in the US you have a different consistency of flour than in Germany, for example. So it was a very hard process, but now we have around 150,000 professionally produced recipes, which is more than any other recipe provider has from a premium standpoint. What's important to note here is that I was talking about Bauer Media Group as the parent company with all these brands. We made the strategic decision about 1.5 years ago to separate the digital business into its own company and called it Bauer XL Media. And the reason was that both the business models, but also the mindset of the people, of the staff that you need to be successful is completely different. So now we have completely dedicated teams that work exclusively on the digital versions of all of the brands and all of the businesses. And there is no content sharing whatsoever happening. So if you look at J14, for example, they don't use any of the print magazine's content. It's all exclusively produced for digital, because the kind of content that resonates well, that works digitally, is completely different than what might work in a print magazine. Just to give you 2 examples, so InTouch Weekly, as I said, is our celebrity site. What we try to focus on here is to be as much against the standards in the industry as possible, where 10 years ago when InTouch in print was launched, all of the celebrity magazines pretty much looked like the New York Times, meaning you had a lot of text and it was very intense to read. And with InTouch, we introduced an image-driven magazine experience. And today, every celebrity magazine looks like this. If you look at People, Us Weekly, everywhere it's full-size images. But now online, it's like 10 years ago. Usually you have one photo and a lot of text, and it's a lot of work to read the articles. With InTouch, we wanted to introduce the focus on images again digitally. As you can see here, the image is really what sells the story, and then underneath there's a small caption. But it's very much about the lean-back experience that also differentiates us from other players in the market.
Would you tell us a little bit about the ways in which you're using data and analytics to optimize content and optimize the editorial choices that you're making on the fly? Yeah,
so what's interesting to note is that with all of the sites that we have, we usually have no more than 2 editors on staff. So let's say InTouch Weekly, it's around 9 million unique users a month. We have 2 editors that are working in this team in a dedicated way. And the reason why they're able to achieve so much traffic with so little headcount is because we focus on writing the right stories rather than just many stories. So our goal is identifying the top 10 stories that drive most of the traffic rather than having 100 stories per day with only very little traffic. And our editors own the whole production life cycle. So on the print side, with a magazine, you have 5 people involved in producing a story, from the reporter to the writer to the photo editor. So there's a lot of sharing of responsibility. Online, these 2 editors, each of them owns their whole cycle, from ideation to pulling the photo to promoting it on social media to eventually looking at analytics. And because they own the whole cycle, they know that a certain photo clicked better, or a certain teaser worked better, or a certain topic was working better than another one. So this way we're able to keep the editorial input relatively low, but maximize the distribution of the traffic for each of the stories that we do.
That's amazing. That head count is amazing, but it's, I mean, it's a lesson I think that any branded content maker could learn. I mean, all the high head count newsrooms that are still out there could learn a lesson from that use of that kind of efficiency.
And for us, it was, again, because we split the company, we could start over and figure it out how to do the right way, rather than just replicating what the print model was, which is you have a lot of people doing a lot of things. Yeah. Okay, then we have J14, which, as I said, is our teen brand. It's interesting for two reasons. One, you can see here there's the main navigation. We don't have traditional channels like beauty or fashion or entertainment, but we have celebrity channels, so you can actually navigate and customize the experience based on the celebrities that you like. And the reason for that is that we know that people, in the specific example here of teen readers, buy our magazines for the celebrities. If we wouldn't be writing about Justin Bieber or Selena Gomez, they wouldn't buy us just because it's J14. And the reason why we set up the site this way is to really give the fans of each of the stars a dedicated homepage that they come back to on a frequent basis. What's also interesting with J14, why it was a good success on the print side, it was never the leading brand compared to the competitive set like Teen Vogue or 17. But digitally, J14 is now the largest teen brand on Facebook overall. Like, there's no other teen brand that has more Facebook fans, more engagement than we have. We have 5.7 million Facebook fans for the English version, and then we launched a Hispanic version that has 3.2 million Facebook fans. So overall, we have around 9 million Facebook fans for J14 alone. And as Steve said in the beginning, everything has been organic, so we never paid for any Facebook fans or any traffic. And just to give you two examples of the engagement rate that also validates the point that we didn't buy any users. This is a post here that got 120,000 likes just on the post basis, 1,100 shares, and 2,600 comments. And so a lot of it comes down to writing about the right celebrities and attracting the fans that resonate most to the reader. But we also figured out ways not just to build engagement on Facebook, but to actually translate it into traffic to the website. Another example over here, 100,000 likes as well. So we can see that on a post-by-post basis, the 5.7 million fans that we have don't just consume, but also interact and engage. And each time there's an engagement, it multiplies to a bigger audience, which increases our fan count even further. Talking about the ad experiences that we have, and Steve mentioned that we very much focused on programmatic. I would say almost all of our revenues come from third-party sources or programmatic. We don't have a dedicated digital direct sales team. And the reason for that is when we started 4 years ago now, in 2012, we only had 1 million users across all of our brands. And there was just no case to be made to be successful selling ourselves directly. But with programmatic, it's not about the entry point of size, but each impression of each user counts and can be monetized. And we found that with focusing on programmatic and focusing on growing the content organically, we could build a profitable business from day one, where revenue was linearly growing to the traffic. So each time we double traffic, we also double revenue. And that's been working very well for us, not just from a scale perspective, but also from a profitability standpoint. Two mobile ad experience here, J14, so you can see, and there was some animation that I'm not sure you saw, or it's not working on these slides here, but basically that's a background skin on the left. That phone is actually spinning around the J14. Oh, there it's spinning now, okay. And on the right, there is a Tic Tac, where if you shake your phone, then these Tic Tacs fly around your screen. And so none of this we sold on our own, but we are able to work with different companies that are specialists in each of the fields. In this case, this is a company called Cargo. They build mobile ad experiences and sell them to advertisers at scale. So they're the experts on building the ad execution and selling it at scale. And we plug in and get it to run on our sites automatically. Another example, talking about how to optimize for programmatic and also how to give you as the advertiser the best performing campaigns. There is a lot of conversation about viewability. You can see here that we optimize the layout of the page so that both ads are always in view, no matter how you engage with the site. And this way we can make sure that it actually performs. to the extent that you would expect it to. So very much, since we are focused on programmatic, we're aware of all the needs that an advertiser has that we can leverage to increase our CPMs, especially around viewability and around data that we can make available to target the content and the advertisements. Yeah.
So well, first of all, I just wanted to underscore, I've been covering magazines for 20 years, and underscore how all the different pieces you just described are so radically different from the way magazines traditionally not only come at magazines, but also came at digital for 20 years. That everything from everything from the head count to the ways in which you're conceiving what quality content is, to also the, I think one of the things that you mentioned here was that when you're converting people to loyal users on the back end, you're not making them lovers of InTouch. You're not going under the delusion that maybe Cosmo does or People does, that they're in love with your brand. They're in love with the place that you're providing for them and the ways in which you're giving them a conduit towards the things they really love, which are Justin Bieber or a Kardashian place. But that sort of no longer sort of gushing over the brand itself, your own media brand, but understanding you're creating specific experiences that's driving them. And there are other things that are actually driving the interest.
Yeah, what matters the most these days, especially with Facebook being the main source for many publishers of traffic, is it all comes down to the relevance and the quality of the content. It doesn't really matter anymore if it's InTouch in the news feed that has that video or that article or Christian's personal blog. In the end, it all comes down to having the right content and continuing the quality, so then eventually people end up subscribers to the brand.
So let's talk about the business model and the role of programmatic in here, and how you're able to realize the CPMs you need to support this. How are you able to, this is not just a matter of tonnage. This is not just a matter of generating enormous amounts of traffic with a low overhead and then using low-price programmatic to finance it. Right, you're turning levers that ultimately have been growing your CPMs. Why don't you bring us inside how that happens?
I think the model that we have today that works for us so well wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. So a lot of it depends on the maturity of the ad tech space and also of the willingness of advertisers to invest in this execution, where now these days it's a lot about having the right audience with the data that we can make available to advertisers that ultimately gives them the target that they're looking for. In our case, a brand-safe environment. So our selling proposition is that we optimize for all of the quantitative elements like viewability and the engagement rate around the ads, making sure that it's not just 4 viewable ads next to each other, but there's also a good ratio around the amount of ads and the relevance. But the different levers that we have is, on the one hand, trying to work with specific partners and figuring out the right ad stack from a yield optimization standpoint. So doing header bidding and a lot of private marketplace transactions to eventually increase the sell that we can make around all the data that we have available and all the quality of the inventory that we have.
So we're at a point now in the market where the data actually is mattering on the CPM side. You're really actually seeing it move the CPM. So the better, more and better data that you're putting into the system really is realizing better CPMs. Since you mentioned layout and viewability, are you and this was part of the discussion yesterday about clutter and ad blocking. Are you seeing metrics that suggest that layout, lack of clutter, cleanness of the experience actually has an impact on ad effectiveness?
Yes, definitely ad effectiveness. It depends on what the KPIs that you're looking for. So if it's viewability, then, and the only thing you're looking at is viewability, then you probably have a very effective campaign with, as I said, 5 ads that are next to each other on the same page. If you're looking for click-through or for engagement, probably not so much. So it always has to be a healthy mix of what's the right amount of ads and what's the intrusiveness of the ads. If I have a big interstitial ad, it's viewable, probably people click by accident, but it's not a good user experience, and eventually that will lead to ad blocking.
Yeah, I want to get into user experience, how you're measuring user experience and what your experience has been with ad blocking.
Yeah, for the user experience part, we don't look at it only on the CPM level by ad unit, but a revenue per user level, both on the page view, but also as a lifetime value over time. And so we do different tests where we can realize if we show 3 ads versus 2 ads, do we see a drop-off in engagement? Do we see an increase in RPM or lifetime value? Because people come back more often if they had a better ad experience. So those are the experiences or the tests that we do, which ultimately always ties back to the lifetime value rather than the immediate benefit of a CPM.
I mean, it's an important lesson for considering extending a conversation we had yesterday about, are there really metrics against good experiences? And you're suggesting if publishers take the time and the trouble to put in a data point like lifetime value of consumer, they'll see those metrics. And the metrics will actually lead them towards better environments.
Yeah. The easy way is you just show a very intrusive ad that pays a high CPM to a user once, and then eventually they might never come back twice. And so being able to identify if they come back twice or more often and how much they're worth over time is, in my opinion, the better long-term strategy to build a sustainable business.
Where you're seeing ad blocking, since you're a worldwide company and you're in deep in a lot of markets, tell us a little bit about the ad blocking picture internationally and what you're seeing.
It's definitely a different picture for each country. The most saturated market in terms of ad blocking rate is Germany. It's a 40+% rate of ad blocking. There's some.
It's like a sport over there, isn't
yes,
it?
Yeah. It's also, when I was talking to a company, SourcePoint, that wants to remove ad blocking, they're from the US. It was created by, I think, the founder of AdMeld. They've first opened up an office in Berlin rather than the US because they know that this is the biggest issue and they have the highest adoption rate if they go there first. And it's very fascinating to see, but besides just the country, it also depends on the demographic, where we see higher ad blocking rates for male-focused websites, like we have car websites or tech websites, than, let's say, for women websites, 40+. And there was fear that that would change. For example, if Apple makes it now easier to install ad blockers on mobile devices, but specifically for the US, we haven't seen any change at all. So it's
do you have a global policy on ad blocking? Have you come up, in a context like Germany where that's taken a hit?
Yeah. There are kind of three different ways how you can pursue it. The first one is you can ask someone to pay or not access the content. For the kind of brands that we have, which is more lifestyle, celebrity content, I don't think, unless everyone in the industry does the same, it would work. Because unless you have a very, very tight audience, like a daily newspaper that has a very affluent audience that's willing to pay the content, there's always another place that can give it to you for free. So the two things that we do is both recovery. There's technology that shows the ad anyway, even if they have an ad blocker installed, even though that's kind of a cat and a mouse game where eventually they figure out how to block it nevertheless. And the other one is that you just point out that this is funded by advertising. And so these are the two things that we're actively engaging in.
The technical solution is something that you've got a third party that works on. So it's their job to chase the mouse.
Exactly.
Constantly chase the mouse, and you just plug it in. And is that proving effective?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about the lessons that you're learning that media buyers can take away from this in terms of of optimizing their media buying on sites.
I think the biggest question everyone should ask is, what do I want to get out of it? Like, is it direct response? Is it branding? Do I want click-throughs? Do I want conversions? Do I want sales? Is it online or offline? And answering all of these questions is important to figure out what the right strategy should be. But as a general starting point for everything, I feel like there has been a big conversation about programmatic kind of driving CPMs down and being a cheap place to buy low-quality inventory, which is a wrong perception if it's pursued the wrong way. Meaning, if you actually work with premium publishers or publishers that have proven ways of generating traffic that are not based on acquiring traffic, you don't have to worry about frauds, you don't have to worry about engagement and viewability. So it's very much still the traditional way of interacting with premium places as you used to in magazines or TV or radio, just that the efficiency and the targeting abilities have been improved. So I think the wrong way to go about programmatic is to go to any DSP and say, I don't want to pay more than 5 cents CPM and expecting a great performance out of it. It's still about picking the right players in the market, setting up private marketplace deals that you can then transact on based on much more data than you had available before. Might it be your first-party data that you bring with you, or might it be specific audience data that you know you want to target? But the risk of fraud, of non-performing ads goes down if you manually choose certain partners that you're going to work with, as you did in the old way, not just relying on the automated execution.
How much header bidding are you doing?
We have right now 5 partners integrated, and we're planning to do 5 more, so 10 in total. Header bidding, to me, if it works out the way that everyone wants it to, will become the new standard of how ads are being served, or the decision-making on ads is being done on the publisher side. because it's the first time there is a true unified auction across a horizontal layer of ad partners rather than the traditional waterfall where each time there is a passback to the next advertiser in the waterfall, it loses quality because data can't be passed through to the next one. So it gets less attractive as an advertiser the further down you are in the waterfall. And it's just a better way because from an advertiser standpoint, you have full access to the whole inventory. You see all users, all impressions, all the data, and can then make an informed decision.
And the buyer's getting a better view of all of your properties, right?
Like
They're getting a greater sense of who you are and what you offer.
Like at a traditional media company, usually the direct sales was above everything, like the traditional IO-based, RFP-based direct sales. And after that, there was the traditional waterfall based on negotiated deals. And depending on where you are in that waterfall, you may have never seen the user that you wanted, that you would have been willing to pay for much more than the publisher would have known. With header bidding, it's all lined up on the same priority level. So like the direct sales traditionally, but also every other publisher that uses, every other advertiser that uses header bidding gets to look at the same user, and whoever is paying the most for this user in this moment gets the impression. So there is no preference anymore on some manual deals or some predetermined metrics that are based on performance of the past, but it's all in real time based on the current user.
Does it change the way the buyer buys? I mean, in terms of tactics and bidding strategies?
It should be. I think if you look at it from an audience standpoint, you now have a much bigger pool to target. Like if you want moms in New York that are between 30 and 40, the pool is not going to be so large. And if you're working on a traditional private marketplace or even open exchange environment, you don't even have access to a lot of the inventory because it never reaches that point if you're not doing the same through header bidding.
One of the criticisms of programmatic from the media side, from the very beginning, is that it erodes the value proposition of context. Is that if you're buying audiences, then you're not buying, in essence, by definition, you're not buying media. You're not buying environments. You're not buying into the notion that context matters in terms of ad impact and in terms of experience. How do you answer that, both conceptually but also in talking to advertisers? And maybe, since quantification really is what's driving everything right now, is find ways to quantify the value, the value of context within this system that is still about buying audiences.
I can give you two examples. First one, there was a campaign Adidas did. They had a Selena Gomez sneaker, and they could just target 12 to 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds anywhere and hope that they would, when they see the ad, eventually have the purchase intent and click and do whatever their campaign goal was. But in our case, we produced a lot of Selena Gomez content on J14, and we have the ability to expose the data to the programmatic channels, what the articles is about, or what the articles are about, so we can make available to the SSPs on our side that an article is about Selena Gomez. And so in this way, the Selena Gomez sneaker that might have used audience targeting actually was showing up around our Selena Gomez content and saw much better click-through rates and much better performance because of it. And we didn't have to produce any specific Selena Gomez sneaker content. It was just working automatically because our CMS was giving the data to the SSPs. The other example is, in terms of content optimization, we have 3 articles just to compare. Each of them that I'm going to show you generated more than 1 million page views. The first one, Dance Moms Facts on Life and Style, versus a plastic surgery transformation article on Life and Style, and Celebrity's Bad Teeth on Life and Style. As I said, each of them had more than 1 million page views. The question is, which one of those had the better CPM? And the ones on the right, actually, we saw a 5 to 10% lift. And again, it's not based on small impression numbers, but at 1 million impressions. And the reason is that because we were exposing the categories, the content information to the advertisers, they knew that people now looking at these articles like Celebrity's Bad Teeth, then they were much better able to target the ads and were willing to pay much more. So maybe then you saw an Invisalign or a brace company next to the Celebrity's Bad Teeth article. But that's also very much how we look at how we should produce content, not just what drives traffic, but also what's worth more to the advertiser, and ideally combining the two. So we figure out how to drive traffic and maximize the relevance to the advertisers.
Anybody have any questions for Christian? let me wrap with a question about what is coming in the next year for you on the publisher side that you're most excited about.
Yeah, for us, the next step that we're moving into now is into the transactional space, where, just to give some perspective, as a company, as I said, we have around 2.5 billion in digital revenue, in overall revenue worldwide, and digital is around 120 million of that. So it's not as big as the other parts of the company. And the reason that we want to go into transactional is because our goal is not to go from 120 to 200 or 300 million in revenue, but to billion plus. And there's no content company out there, no editorial content company out there that relies on advertising that will ever get there to a billion plus in revenue, just because the revenue per user is so low. So what we're working on right now is going into a place of transactions like travel or e-commerce or gaming or financial comparisons, not just doing an affiliate model, but actually building or buying these places of transactions so we own the point of transaction and get higher margins. But what's more interesting is that in order to convert the users, the editorial users, to the places of transactions, we're in the process of building our own ad network where we not just look at contextual signals, like you read an article about a trip, so we show you an Expedia-style widget that points to our own website. But our question is, how can we find out that someone that reads a Kim Kardashian article might be interested in buying a car rather than showing them a beauty ad, which is worth much less? And we are in the process of building all of the data collection on our own, so we know both on internal data collection, but also on external data that we can acquire, that you, even though you read the Kim Kardashian article, might be looking for a trip to Miami, and then we can show you a promotion to buy that trip and link to our own transactional travel website that leads to a much higher revenue per user.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think that underscoring that is that larger message that you sort of started out with in this piece, that you looked at it, coldly looking at what's possible in building a digital media company. There's a certain revenue ceiling that digital simply imposes that in many ways I think maybe traditional media haven't quite gotten to yet.
Right.
Christian, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
We're going to pivot to mobile.
By Scott Harkey, who is the co-founder and president of Owens Harkey, Phoenix-based, but with multiple offices across the U.S. and India as well as Derek Thompson, who is the chief strategy officer of Place IQ, where he's working on their enterprise business, selling to large holding companies, independent agencies, as well as looking for data integration partnerships. And Chris Wexler, who's the SVP of media at Kramer Krasel, one of the largest independent media agencies in the U.S. Chris has sort of a diverse background that spans Wall Street as well as Broadway, so if you want to talk to him after, there's a lot of fun things to learn. We're going to be, like I said, talking about starting with cross-device tracking. I sort of assume that we're going to touch on a lot of the things that we heard yesterday as well as today, but what I'd like to start off with is a grounding for each of you. What is the genesis of cross-device tracking, and how are you deploying it for your clients respectively? Anyone can.
Why don't you go on this one?
Okay. So hopefully we can at least make this conversation, by the way, interesting enough so that you guys can look up from your email from time to time. And maybe you'll be kind enough to engage with us and ask us some questions too. I think that would be fun. Nothing has been scripted. So the question is cross-device tracking.
Yeah.
And I guess the way I'll approach that first and foremost is let's start with why brands are looking to be able to develop a capability that is what I would say cross-device. Clearly, the answer to that is because we know that there's no longer these verticals, if you will, or these silos of media, and that consumers don't really live their lives in terms of thinking about what screen they're on and how they interact with content. It's simply seamless. And so having said that, the ability to understand consumers needs to also have that thread of seamlessness. And if you really think about it, in terms of what is really enabling, if you will, today, the ability to understand consumers, cross-device behavior, and content that spans devices, it really comes down to mobile. And the way we view mobile with it, Place IQ, is that mobile is this unifying device, if you will, that ties everything else together. We all know that we have these devices. We all use them throughout the day. Many of us are using them right now. And we use them in the home, and we take them wherever we go. These devices, as many of you know, are always generating data. In fact, these devices are always sending and receiving. And as a young engineer at Motorola, that was one of the first things that I learned, is that we really didn't know, if you will, the capability that was being created with these devices, even when we had them turned on but weren't using the phone. The reality is that that device is always sending a constant ping, and that data is out there. So the ability now to harness that data to understand the physical world, and think about it from the perspective of marketers. Do we really understand what people do in the physical world? The answer is no. At best, we try to understand through focus groups, and we've got purchase data, and we make inferences, and we try to be deterministic or probabilistic, but the reality is you can now understand consumers by places they choose to go. Where do they choose to shop? Where do they choose to dine? Where do they choose to recreate? Where do they choose to travel? What do commute paths look like? All of these breadcrumbs now are generated by that mobile device. And the other thing you can do with the mobile device is you can understand what we call home dwells. Mobile devices are used in the home constantly. So the ability to understand and append a mobile device to a parcel and a home dwell is really the link that now allows you to connect all of that other cross-screen behavior. And by that I mean not only desktop behavior and tablet behavior, but also television viewing and everything else that is appended to the home. The home has been what marketers have used for a long, long time to understand consumers. Loyalty card data all comes back to the home. Census data all comes back to the home. Vehicle registration data through Polk all comes back to the home. So that unifying device of mobile that I talked about is now the piece that now allows us to put all of those pieces together, and for the first time as marketers we can understand the physical world and we can understand the digital world, and they're not separate. We can bring them together, and when you do that, your ability now to speak to brands and to speak to consumers is extremely powerful. Your knowledge of the decisions that they make and the cross-shopping behaviors that they have and how to look at loyalty and your ability to now target these audiences is extremely powerful, and that's all from the data. So I don't want to monopolize that discussion any further, but I hope that starts to at least set a grounding for how cross-device is done today.
Chris, you want to go?
Yeah, it's definitely true that we think it's a really important data point. I think it's for us, it's all about effectiveness. What is the most effective way to spend our dollars? What's the most effective way to deploy our marketing? And mobile becomes kind of the primary key that can link together Wi-Fi and link together business and home and more commute. And so while it's early days and it's much more probabilistic than deterministic right now, but I think every 6 months it's getting significantly better as far as a signal of kind of unifying an individual person. It allows us to reduce waste, because we're not necessarily targeting somebody 10 times on this platform and 5 times on this platform and not understanding that that's all the same person. But also, eventually, and we're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer and closer, we'll be able to better understand lifetime value because we're stitching all this together. And I think that that's why we're excited and we're pushing hard into this space, and really understanding all the players in this space, because it's about effectiveness of marketing and creating those kind of unique personas is a critical part of that. And we haven't had that up until this point.
Do you want to give it a look?
Yeah. For us, I think, we have a little different view on it as more of a traditional agency doing a lot of digital, but our background is more in the traditional and creative side. But for us, what we try to do is, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't think you're ever going to get perfect tracking on multiple devices and what you're doing on TV and what you're doing on radio and where the digital and mobile and social, and there's just all this stuff out there.
Google disagrees.
Well, for us, what we've tried to do is say, okay, we're going to focus on these industries that we know, and we know what those key leading indicators are for those industries, and we know if we track that lead all the way through what the value is going to be. So, what we know a good campaign is everything mixed together, and the better the PR will be, the better the digital will be, the better the conversion rate will be, and so we're tracking all of this to the very end part, which is a sale, a customer lead, a hotel booking, and knowing what those key points are, to me, is what tracking is, not so much clicks or click-through rate or impressions. So for us, it's all about about the dollars and tracking that all the way through rather than what did TV do, what did programmatic do, what's mobile doing. And certainly we've used a lot of third-party validators to go through that space because of the fraud, and we're going to talk about that as well. But for us, it all comes down to that all the way through the funnel conversion, and that's the tracking for us of what each of these mediums are doing and cross-platform.
When you use mobile, though, as really the starting point then for your programmatic buying, does location then become the new currency? Is that the more important?
I don't know if it's a currency. It definitely is the killer app of mobile. It's the reason.
It's the killer app of everything in many regards.
It truly is. I mean, location has so many signals on consumer behavior, which I think is the most important part of it for us. If you're outside of a restaurant, you're significantly more likely to walk into that restaurant. If you're driving around, you're in a different mindset than if you're at home, than if you're at work. And I've always said, as we do media planning, that you're a different person at 7 a.m. on Monday than you're at 7 p.m. on Friday, right? It's same person, same persona, same everything else, but your mindset's completely different. Mobile gives us a whole nother layer of information of mindset and as a result, we're able to give valuable information versus just pummel you because you hit the right demographic or you hit the right thing. We're actually able to give you valuable information, and that's really our job, is to get valuable information to consumers when they want it, so they don't want to block us, so they don't hate us. That's our job.
And to Chris's point, what I think mobile also allows us to do in terms of validating, if you will, measuring and bringing that currency, it's that the currency, if you will, of your media and doesn't necessarily have to be that closed loop, one-to-one direct correlation to purchase. I think that's nice, and I think as a former brand marketer, that's something that we would always look for, is what is the return on that ad spend and how are we doing that? But if you think about it for a minute, what is your media, or what should your media be accountable for? Should it really be responsible for that person going out and buying that new Chevy truck? If you think so, I think it's ridiculous. I think what your media can do, if it's appropriate, is it can speak to people, it can create that awareness, and it can drive that next process or that next step in the process. So if you happen to be an auto manufacturer, I would think that the next logical thing you would want to do is drive people into your showroom, drive people to your lots, let them look at your products. It doesn't mean they're going to buy it. I mean, merchants still have a role to do, right? The automakers have to develop a good product, the people have to know how to sell it, the store has to be clean, the price point has to be right. So why put all of that burden on your media? And I think when you start taking a look at the ability now of measurement and with mobile to be able to understand real world visitations, it now puts our media in a context that becomes very actionable to us, which is it driving that next step? Because really, as marketers, as we all are, that's what we should be accountable for, and that's what we should be trying to understand. Which one of those line items, that creative, those tactics, and so on, is actually doing a better job of increasing that consideration set? So that's something else I think we should think about as we start thinking about, mobile, the role that it has, and certainly within attribution.
So can you talk a little bit about the cost, right? So what's holding clients back from using different attribution models, including cross-device tracking? Is cost an issue today?
Cost is always an issue, but I don't think that's the main thing holding people back. I think it's understanding value, which is a twist on that. And consumers don't want us to replicate the mistakes we made in desktop on mobile phones. It's an intensely personal device. And so we as marketers have to be very cognizant of that, because we can really break that kind of what little trust we have with consumers. We can break that if we do this wrong. And so I think it's really important for us to understand mobile for what it is and understand it for the passive data points that we have, location being a big part of that. But if we're going to ask for the same level of transparency down to cookie tracking and panel basis and all this, that we had to prove banners, because banners counterintuitively are very effective. Like every time I run a study, I go, I cannot believe it drove that much in sales. But because we were so nervous going into digital 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we overbuilt proof that digital works. We're now asking for that same level of proof to mobile. I don't know if we will, A, ever get there because consumers won't let us, and B, I don't think it's necessarily necessary. We need to understand holistically how this is driving results, and I think we can get there without getting to the same level of granularity. So as a result, those of us who grew up in a much more granular display space are probably over asking.
And to echo that point, I think you're exactly right, Chris. I think, right about the time we first started talking about programmatic and big data, and you see your client size getting really big and really excited, and this is going to change their business, and everything's going to be great now because we can be so much more targeted. I think mobile's kind of in that same context now, that because location-based does exist and we can target the right person at the right life cycle on a mobile device right by your location and all this stuff, that they think that's going to dramatically.
Earlier about if mobile is the crack, and are you missing potential consumers because you're not giving a wide enough berth to your marketing to actually be effective, to bring in new audiences. So does hyper-targeting actually, to a certain point, hurt you, or hurt you from a long-time value perspective?
I think there's a major risk in over-targeting. Waste is one of the most powerful things in marketing. We developed demographics back in the day because those were the people that were most likely to like us, not the only people that liked us. And I think we as marketers tend to forget that. That's why television is so effective. It has really effective waste. And I think we need to be, particularly when we get into programmatic, we need to be thinking about that along the lines of, hey, there's some tip of the spear stuff and there's some broader swath stuff. The nice thing about mobile is it's not quite as, location is a fairly broad swath, and you're going to get more people than you would expect when you work through your MRI, Simmons, ComScore type stuff. You're going to get a lot more people into that mix, and every one of our brands is a leaky bucket, and we need new consumers every day. And in the end, that's our job, new consumers coming in. And so, yes, we want to be as targeted as possible, but we want some of that murky waste to drive even more in.
Yeah. Derek, how many segments are at play? Is it 1,800 different audience segments that you've got? Is it more than that? I don't.
In terms of actual predefined audience segments, thousands of audience segments, right? And it's based on, as I mentioned before, this understanding of consumers and what are important to consumers based on the choices that they make, and then tying those real world decisions back to their digital behaviors. But if I could go back to this notion, your first question, which was this notion of micro targeting and what's kind of the cost benefit of that. I think the first thing I would say is that this concept of I have a really niche audience and I really want to go out there and I just want to go after that audience. Fundamentally, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, if I'm Purina and I want to speak to pet owners, and specifically I want to speak to people that own a dog, then that's my audience. That's my niche audience. And going broader than that, I don't know if that would necessarily make a lot of sense. I think the question becomes well, how do you find that audience? I mean, that's what Purina has been challenged with for a long, long time. And the ability now to, let's say, well, let's try to understand who are these people. Well, can we do that? Absolutely. Now, what else can we understand about these people? And the more that you can dimensionalize that consumer in terms of other things that they do, and as a macro trend, if that be the case, places that they choose to shop and all these other types of things, that now opens up a new set of opportunities for marketers than just going out there with a very pinpoint type of approach across desktop or mobile or what it might be. And what you might find is that what you thought about that consumer really isn't true. You thought you knew who they were, you were marketing to them, but they're really not the people that are buying your products. So how does that change? And it should change. It should change your thinking, it should change your strategy, and it should also then dimensionalize for you other ways that you can engage with these people. Maybe it's not just going heavy on Animal Planet or whatever it might be. Maybe what you're finding is that the people who really own these pets in a particular market are actually business professionals, for example, or they happen to be families, and they happen to do X, Y, and Z. And when you start looking at it from that lens, it starts to open up for you a variety of ways that you can go out and message to these people other than the traditional type of tactics that you've used in the past.
So consumers will ultimately receive a more targeted message. They will receive a more granular message based on their interests, based on their location, based on their behaviors through cross-device tracking. There was a lot of discussion in the panel yesterday, I thought, on ad blocking was fun to watch, certainly, and very interesting. But consumers are opting out, right? So is there a concern that cross-device tracking, A, is going to have harder time getting up to scale if consumers are willing to walk away? And second is it really more about the creative and the messaging? I mean, I do believe that whether you're a publisher or whether you're a tech company, there is something inherent about consumers speaking with a download of a device app in order to make sure that they don't have to see message, it doesn't suck up their bandwidth. But I also think that it comes down to a creative level, that they're not seeing the kinds of things they're seeing. So how do marketers get better at it so that consumers will not want to opt away?
I think as marketers, we do have a job in terms of creating the absolute best content for our consumers. And people are opting out, and it will be an issue, but I tend to think that long-term people and consumers know the trade-off, which has existed for a long, long time, which is, ads and free content. And, certainly major publishers are moving to firewall and paid. And so that they've already kind of changed the game a little bit. And I think consumers are fighting back and saying, okay, well, if there's going to be some paid and some free, then, I'll go ad blocking. But I think the big thing the big takeaway we've had as an agency is on the content side. And then when you go to content on mobile, I think we have a huge challenge. We're so focused on targetability and timing and budget and tracking and fraud, and then at the last minute we're like, oh, we need some rich media or display banner ads, and we're really losing sight of customers and people want to be entertained with their content, and it can't be just some pop-up ad because you're in front of a store to buy something. And I think we have a huge responsibility, especially in the digital and programmatic space, to create that content that really is going to engage with our customers. And I think we're doing a bad job right now, and there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, and I think it's partially because advertising isn't a monolith. And if you're thinking about a campaign as a whole, it's not one thing. And particularly here at the Programmatic Insider Summit, we're focusing on the efficiency, broad reach side of things, right? And even the targeted reach, right?
I love that you actually just had to turn.
Yeah, well,
where am I today?
It's right behind us. It's very large. But the way we think about it at Kramer Krasselt is we have two roles. And it's funny because in 1983, if you could buy a spot in the last episode of MASH, you were done for the year. You were set. You got everybody. And it's getting more and more bifurcated and more fragmented. But as a result, what we're really coming on to is a large portion of efficient reach, which is important, and a large portion of content and engagement. And those things are getting further and further apart. Now, there's some elements of, if you're building great content, that you can kind of distribute through effective reach. But we're not fooling ourselves at CK to say, we're going to make the best mobile banner that people love. Because it's just, nobody cares. In the end, it's going to be a simple message that you can see and be done with that tells a simple story. It's really more like out of home. We're moving most of our creative efforts away from rich media because we know most consumers don't care. And we're listening and we're going, okay, you don't care, you don't want to search for the X, you just want a simple message that you can digest very quickly and move away. And we're okay with that. We're also building deep immersive experiences that we can then promote through that. And so that's, for Edward Jones, we co-produce a program with them. We co-produce a program with ESPN. We are building, we have partnerships with BIC with 40 to 50 bloggers where they're building content and then we're helping distribute it. It's not, programmatic is one part of a much broader system. And if you're not thinking content on one side that is valuable and simple messaging that is valuable, because it's about valuable. Sometimes that's content. Sometimes it's, hey, it's only $9.99 today. Sometimes it's a simple message. And if you don't have a full comms platform and you're doing programmatic in a vacuum, you're doing programmatic a disservice and you're doing the industry a disservice.
So, results. What are you seeing? Has mobile been commercialized well? Can you make money off of it from an agency side? And B, what do clients see, what do consumers see as the mobile benefit with cross-device tracking built in? Am I asking that wrong?
I would argue that consumers have no idea we're doing it, and if they did, they'd be mad. And so we need to be careful about that as an industry. I mean, I think the reason there's been zero uproar about Apple not giving in to the FBI about terrorism is because everybody's like, I don't want the government in my phone. I have pictures of my wife, and I have this, and I have that. People don't want their phones, don't want us there. And so we need to respect that. Like, as a whole, our mantra at CK is make friends, not ads. Well, breaking into somebody's phone is not a way to be a very good friend. And so we're trying to be. We obviously focus very heavily on how do we keep this privacy safe and get to the line without being creepy. But cross-device tracking is something that, frankly, the people in this room and maybe 4,000 more people in the country really know is happening. But
I guess what I'm asking is, are you seeing uplift in sales conversion?
I think it's hard to tie it directly today. I think we're making investments knowing that that's the future. We are, and largely because we don't necessarily see these tracking all the way back to some of the standard Nielsen Home Panel or Catalina or something like that. We're not seeing it kind of track all the way back to hard dollar sales today. But the logic says this is the future, this is the way to go. And so when we think about this, right now it's more in the media efficiency space. That's where it's playing the most of reducing waste, increasing reach, doing the things that we know work. Right. I think we're close, and I'm sure some people have already done it, but we're very close to tying that loop all the way into offline and online. Online sales, we're seeing it. Offline sales, we haven't quite got there yet. And to be honest, in my mind, online sales are easy, offline sales are hard, and offline sales are 95% of sales. So
yeah.
I think the currency is the data. I mean, if you really want to take a look at, what is the ROI and the value and the impact of cross-device capabilities, it comes down to the data. If you have the data, then the question is, how are you deploying that data? And if you're now deploying it in a way, because you've now, you have a better understanding of consumers, you now can use it as a way to measure, if you will, your addressable TV spend, meaning, am I driving the type of actions that I want? Then I think that becomes the value in the data. And I think the data is tied to your other question, which is the pricing discussion. And where I think there's a challenge in the industry right now is that, speaking to a tech company about data, especially if you're an agency, is hard to do. It's hard to have the product expertise, the data science background, the engineering background to sit down and say, where does your data come from? Do you have data licenses for that data? What are the capabilities of that data? What are the dependencies of that data? What can we not do with that data? How is that data, not creepy, if you will, and respectful of people's privacy? Those discussions are a bit more meaty and difficult, if you will. They're the good discussions to have, don't get me wrong, but they're not the easy ones. Price is easy. I mean, how much is the data? Well, I just want to buy it on cheap data. Okay, so cheap data, that's fine. Everybody would like things to be as less expensive as possible, but as we all know, there's a value proposition there, right? Just because something is lower priced doesn't mean it's as good as something else. And being able to evaluate that data, that's the challenge. And when people can't do that, or it's too difficult to do, then we just kind of default back to what's easy. And it's tied back again, kind of coming full circle to that value proposition again, because if you're working with data that's not good in the first place, then are you really going to be able to utilize it and see results down the line? Is it really going to be your beacon of truth? The answer is no. So that's one of the things that I think is really holding back this notion of cross-device and data and understanding it and then being able to employ it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the next coming controversy / crisis in the programmatic space is data quality. because there are very few people in our industry that actually vet the data. A lot of the direct marketers are good at understanding if they derive value from it, but there's a lot of money sitting on the sideline because how do you quantify an extra $1.50? How do you quantify an extra 40 cents? How do you quantify that? And if you do, am I going to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal because we did something horrifying?
Well, and how are you changing your organizations then to face that, right? So does data science become a discipline within the organization, and how is that helping you shape your future?
We've literally invested millions into data and analytics in the last couple of years, in systems, in programming power, in expertise, because it's actually not just impacting media, it's impacting creative, it's impacting brand planning, it's impacting every element of what we're doing. It's about making data-driven decisions on every step, and we're an integrated agency, so on every step of the process. And so we're investing heavily into not only getting people that understand it on a deep level, but that can democratize it to the organization as a whole. Because if one person has the information and nobody else does in the organization, it doesn't really matter. And so that's been a huge focus for us.
I think for us as, an independent boutique in the industry, to keep up with the big players and the big publicly traded agencies in this space, we've had to be really innovative, and we've had to rely heavily on best-in-class partnerships. And I think if you ask us 3 years ago, would we have the type of data partners and analytic partners that we have now, both in-house and out-of-house, we probably would say no. We've got to do everything in-house, and we've got to buy everything, and we've totally, we were wrong, and we've totally changed our thinking on this, and we're having a lot of analytics and data people that aren't our traditional media buyers really vetting and developing best-in-class partnerships with major data companies, major tracking companies here, understand we can be a general contractor, and we're going to have plenty of other partnerships, and we don't have to own absolutely everything that we do. And that's been big for us because it's getting so complicated. We're hiring even a lot of analytics people in-house straight out of college, and that's really interesting. And we were actually talking about this earlier, where you kind of had the big creative teams who had interesting personalities, and they were a lot of fun. And now the new data people coming out of college now is kind of really the old kind of creative teams that were coming into agencies, and it's been really interesting to merge those cultures of people and partnerships. So again, as a smaller independent, it's been both a great opportunity and a big challenge.
Yeah, well, I think it's the amazing ad tech world that's out there. There's no excuse for anyone not to be better at this. There's amazing stuff you can buy off the shelf, you can buy at scale, or you can tap into and be better with data. We're doing a hybrid of build and buy off the shelf because we realize we have to be very nimble. But no matter how small you are, this opportunity is out there.
Do you think, a little bit back to the price question, but more so for the agency guys, media companies, whether integrated or independent, unbundled, their historic benchmark, creativity and all of that, fine, but it's lowest CPM, right? I need to get to the most efficient price point on behalf of my client. Data doesn't live in a most efficient price point, to the points that you were talking about, Derek, where, if it is the cheapest data out there, is it really valuable data? How do you have to start changing the model for the organization in order to account for that? And how do you get clients or procurement at clients understanding that it's not the same widget any longer?
It's all about measurement. It's all about measurement and analytics, because if you don't prove that you are moving, our entire process at CK starts with business goals, not efficiency, not cost, not anything. It's business goals. And so our entire analytical process goes back to business goals. So if I'm paying 20% more for the media, but I'm driving a higher business goal result, they don't care. But if you don't build a transparent and honest system showing that, and if you don't do that before you launch everything, you're never going to get there. And then you're just playing an efficiency game. Now, as we're a big independent, but we're not a Starcom, we're not a Universal McCann. We've had to play the value game for years because we just don't have the same clout in the marketplace. Programmatic changes that a bit. But by and large, we've been proving that business value. And if you don't build those links through measurement, it's never going to work. And frankly, everyone should be doing that anyways.
I mean, on the media side, I mean, every great media person, swears they can get the best deal, right? And that's what we're out there selling. And it's so much BS. I mean, it really is to say one agency, whether you're Starcom or a boutique or an individual is going to get a better rate in real-time bidding than somebody else, I think is stupid. And clients buy it all the time. I mean, they really do. They think I'm getting this CPM, or, oh, this agency is so smart, they're doing a cost per click, or they're doing a cost per conversion model now. And it's all games and shenanigans. And I think as an industry, we're really going through that right now, where people are jumping to, maybe it's a DR agency, or maybe it's a traditional agency, maybe it's a digital agency, based on BS metrics that we know are complete false. And so for me, I mean, when you talk about value, I think it goes to agency-client partnerships and other partnerships, and knowing what the game is and knowing what the business goals are. And we talked about this earlier, but the transparency piece about actually what you're doing, I think, we can talk about a lot of things, but the transparency piece is the biggest issue that everybody, on the agency side and on the client side is talking about. So, when you say the value, and then that's immediately what I go to is I'm like, all our media people, we're all in here together. We know that's BS. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but I get pretty passionate about it, as you can tell.
Can we open it to the floor for some questions?
Yes, we can. Anybody have any questions?
Come on, guys, we're really interested.
Well, I do. I have a bunch, because I'm a mobile guy. Can you talk a little more specifically about the state of cross-device and behavioral tracking on mobile? I mean, I'm only beginning now to see genuine retargeting happen on my phone. I'm seeing it more happen from desktop behaviors being retargeted and echoed on my phone than I am actually seeing my mobile behaviors somehow getting into the programmatic system and actually guiding where ads are showing up. So could you spend a little time, each of you, talking about your views of where we really are in terms of being able to identify a user, track that user either across mobile web or among different apps, and compare that to desktop?
So I would say that from a capability standpoint, to be able to start to connect those breadcrumbs, as I alluded to earlier, that is starting to happen. And it's still at the beginning stage, or the nascent stage, is what I would say. I think some of the challenge is to how it happens, or how it's actually the capabilities allow for themselves to take place, is that ability to be able to match up those data points. So if you think about it in terms of a match key, which is taking unique device IDs and being now able to match that to desktop behavior or household type of behavior and so on, that's the area that is very quickly emerging. And there's really, if you think about it, there's a few firms that really lead in that space, LiveRamp being one of them, TapAd being another one of them. But the ability then for those firms to be able to make that match and to offer that type of scale, and then to be able to work back with brands, that's what's happening now. So I hope that answers your question in terms of how is it happening. And if you're just starting to see it from a consumer's perspective, it's because it is still somewhat early. And I think people are still figuring out how they need to go about that. And the last thing I'll add to that is it starts with the capability of being able to take in the data. I mean, we can talk about how to evaluate the data. Those are good discussions. And I think most marketers find those discussions beneficial. But the question then becomes, if we have good data, what do I do with it? I mean, okay, great. Now what? Am I buying data? Okay, then what do I do with it? What type of platform do I have? And clients are quickly investing in data management platforms that's becoming, right, their universe or their nucleus for pulling in all of this data. And then when you do so, you now start to conflate that into a single user, and now you can start to employ it. But it's still genuinely early, I would say, in that stage.
Yeah, for those digital dinosaurs in the room, we're probably 2006 IP targeting. Like that's about where we were. So maybe 60, 70% trustworthy. And it's much better on mobile web than it is in app. I think in app's still a challenge because of all the different ecosystems there. And so, It's early days, but this is the time to get in and start learning it and making the mistakes before you're just left behind.
But I guess my point is that everything you just described is good reason, is unfortunately good for maybe those who are trying to get revenue from mobile, are good reasons for brands to be reticent, because what essentially you're describing is huge amounts of money are already coming onto mobile. According to the latest eMarketer figures, we're past the tipping point where more programmatic money is going into mobile than desktop display, but it's going in at much higher levels of blindness and capability of be able to use some of the same sorts of data sophistication, ROI reporting of the desktop that's happening on mobile.
But that's just us chasing consumers. The consumers are significantly ahead of the advertisers now, and so we're moving there. People are moving there because they know the consumers are there, and particularly millennial consumers. You're not going to find many millennial consumers on desktops. Many of them will not be on laptops, ever. And so if you want to talk to an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old, you have no choice but to go a little blindly into the night.
How does that reality change the way you come at buying and change just who has the most power on mobile? I mean, we know why Facebook's revenues have skyrocketed, and in part they've skyrocketed, and how much of it's driven by mobile. In part it's because they're solving this problem better than anybody, because they have consumer visibility better than anybody. So my question has to do with how does mobile, because of this basic dynamic about the data and tracking people across platforms and within apps and mobile web, how does that actually change who has the most power here, where the buying takes place, who you go to get those mobile users with the most accurate data?
I mean, for us, I mean, we're media agnostic. I don't care if they're on Facebook or they're on some blog you've never heard of. What we rely on is our data and programmatic partners to put that, to put all those data points together and allow us to target that person at the exact right time for the exact right price that we want to pay. I mean, we all know that. Facebook certainly has done an incredible job, and I think Facebook has done a great job because of the way the content is, and it is certainly more trusted. And so I think that's why we've seen a bigger conversion rate on Facebook, because you're seeing it in an ecosystem that you're very familiar and comfortable with, and the content in it is very engaging. I mean, for us, we've got people that know exactly how many characters with what picture is going to allow Facebook's algorithm to now put that through mobile. And so I think that's why Facebook attracts us and buys, is because of the ecosystem people are familiar in. But it doesn't have to be Facebook. It can be anywhere. I mean, when we were doing a lot of PPC years ago, people were like, how does PPC work? I don't know. How does the light turn on? I just know we can target it at the right time and the right people, and we rely on our data partners to certainly do that. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but
Facebook is huge, but as we're stitching together desktop, as we're getting into the unified personas, we're going to have most of the power of desktop targeting in mobile. Is it 100% there? No, but we're getting closer and closer to having almost as much visibility into mobile, essentially mobile browser as we do to desktop browser. And in-app is a unique situation, but we're getting closer and closer. I don't think our blindness is like it was 2 years ago, where we have zero visibility, or 5 years ago. We now have a much better visibility, and as the unified personas, and that's a lot of reasons why marketers and agencies are diving into DMPs and that kind of thing, because then you're building and refining your own unified user base. And so I think that's a near-term issue that is not a long-term issue.
Let me just give you a quick real-life example. We're working with a donor network company, and they're trying to get people to donate organs. Well, the government now is trying to change federal ID licensing, right? So if somebody is about to turn 16, if someone is going through a name change or a divorce, and oh, by the way, if that person's on their mobile device and inside an MVD at the exact time when they're going to potentially get a new ID card, and we want them to become...
David, panel, thanks very much, guys. Exactly. We have with us Travis Coleman, who's the director media director at Millward Brown Digital. He started out, as many people have in the programmatic field, especially on the financial services side, right? And then moved into working as a media consultant for Millward Brown. Please welcome Travis Coleman.
All right. Thank you guys very much, and thank you for staying with us here. I know it's the last day of a conference and a big night last night and many flights to catch today, so I appreciate you guys taking the time to come here and enjoy a little bit more, and believe me, I'll make it short. I find that oftentimes researchers can pretty much give you a fire hose of information and can probably overload you with data. I'm going to apologize in advance. I probably will overload you with data, but all of this can be found online on our website, and you can go through all of the reports yourself. I'm going to take a couple snippets from what we did. It's called Ad Reaction, and Millward Brown Digital has done this every single year since 2001. To date, Ad Reaction has been done in 42 countries, and actually this last study we had over 13,000 respondents. What we want to understand is how are people consuming media, but also what is the receptivity to that? How do consumers actually respond to the advertising that they're seeing across those platforms? I think a lot of times as marketers, as agencies, as ad tech, we get into the conversation of how do you find them and how do you go after them and how do you target more effectively. But oftentimes what we lose sight of is, okay, what do people actually want? What are people actually engaging with and what are people more receptive to? So we took this study across 42 countries, and we also did this year parallel copy testing in 8 different countries. So we did about 20 ads that we also measured across a number of different metrics, and we'll jump into those. So to go actually consuming passively by collecting this, we wanted to understand kind of where they're spending most of their time and what categories they're going into. And lastly, we did video chats with about 30 or so qualitative respondents, just to then understand a little bit more and have that deeper conversation with them. So as we know, today's consumer is across all devices all the time, but what's most important to remember is that audiences and the average audience touches each device every single day. And it plays in multiple different ways in how they engage with that, and we'll go into those details a little bit more. Now, this is probably a big duh for everybody in this room because obviously you guys probably know this. But let's look at what our focus is. So what we really boiled this down to in the research is 4 different factors. So we want to focus on what is the right person, what is the right content, what is the right context in which to reach that person, and what is the implication for marketers. So let's jump into right person. So again, we're just looking at, okay, how much of the video is viewed across screens and how does targeting improve receptivity? Now, the first thing we understand is that, well, okay, let's go through the background research here. What we learned is that when you look at actual screen usage, 47% of the actual screen time is on a mobile device. And that compares to 17% and 35% in TV against computer and TV, respectively. Now, the media spend is certainly not there. I think we, in the last panel, just talked about that. We don't necessarily have that. But what I think we really want to point out here is that there's a very large opportunity still left in mobile, especially when you look at it compared to computer. Now, when we look at this, we really learn that, the millennial generation is actually consuming the most media, a little bit more than the 16 to 24-year-olds. And this is looking at overall screen time. So you can see that, really where we're actually outpacing is, kind of they're even on TV consumption. They're a little bit over-indexed on computer, and then actually under-indexed on smartphone. Again, US audiences are omni-channel, but digital video and really, digital is changing. What we're actually understanding here is that, about 63% of the actual minutes spent per day, a lot of that is actually still in TV, and so that encompasses both live TV as well as on-demand over-the-top. And then the share of exposure, again, leans heavily toward the TV, but you can see that you're actually starting to see, and I think we all know this, is that the actual consumption is now moving toward mobile. It's moving toward the digital space. Now, when you look at actual video consumption versus non-video consumption across devices, we're starting to see an interesting thing emerge here. So right now we're seeing about 31% of the time is spent actually consuming video, as opposed to other types of media. When you're looking at computers, on smartphone, that's 28%, but on tablet, you're seeing 41% consumption on video versus 59% on non-video content. And it's interesting when you think about this and you go forward, you say, okay, well, how do we actually target this and what specific, kind of groups are actually going into that? So we're seeing that younger audiences, video is becoming a central part of their digital experience. When you look at digital and you look at video specifically within that context, what we're seeing is that video is actually now becoming a place where people are going to find information. Consumers are now actually are really looking at it in a different way, especially when you look at the younger demographics. And at least over a third of the time of the 16 to 24-year-olds is a central part of their actual experience. Now, when you look at the actual, okay, so 16 to 24-year-olds watch the most video, particularly on digital devices. It's interesting. So you look at the older generation, and you actually see a lot more consumption on live TV. That definitely starts to tail off as you get younger. And you actually see most of that consumption actually going to on-demand video. So people that are just watching things like Hulu, Netflix on the larger device, but also things like DVR. Gender actually is an interesting one as well. And what we see is that actually females are typically driving that on-demand video consumption. Males are much less likely across the board, except for on something like tablet, to actually consume video on their digitally or on any other device. Now, binge watching, as I'm sure most of us do, is something that's very common, but it's more of a younger and a more female-driven phenomenon. What we see here is that actually about 2 times the amount of, or women are about 2 times more likely to binge watch within the last day. And actually, when you look at 16 to 24-year-old groups, they're twice as likely to have binge watched yesterday, in this case, than the older generation of the 35 to 45. Now, when you're actually thinking about what kind of content are people consuming while they're on these devices, you see it skewing more towards short-form video. What's important to know here, and I think what really stands out, is that when you're actually targeting people on a mobile device, you need to keep it short. It needs to be sweet. And we'll get into a little bit more of the actual findings that we found from our copy testing research. But I think the most important thing to look at here is that when people are actually looking on their mobile device, when they're consuming media on their mobile device, it needs to be short. The attention span is a lot shorter because of the fact that you have a very limited time. And usually, and we can go dive into it, what you're finding is that mobile is actually one of those situations where people are kind of mixing that in with their consumption throughout the day, which is why you see a larger skew towards short content. Now, what's interesting though is that when people look at actual targeting, and I think this is one of the most important slides, and this is one that I looked at coming here and I thought, okay, this is perfect for programmatic. Obviously, most people don't like advertising. I think we all understand that. However, what we're finding is that people are actually much less likely to be more receptive towards advertising if they know it's targeted to them on any other factors except for their actual interests. What we find is that people are actually more positive when you target them based on what they like to do and something that actually means something to them. They're actually a lot more likely to actually respond positively to it. And then that's followed by brands you like or know, and then down to types of surrounding content, show, website, so on. So let's think about context here in the video space. So most of the time what we find is that people they feel more in control, especially when they're on their digital devices. And this actually plays very, very strongly when you look at things like skippable, because of the fact that people can look away. They can actually kind of control that environment. We find that they really, it's kind of that more lean forward, but they certainly do tend to gravitate toward the digital space. But that's important to understand because as you start to build really that relationship with your consumers, it's about understanding kind of what they feel and what their emotions are towards that sense of control. Now, what we still find though is that receptivity, interestingly enough, is higher on live TV. Now, it's more of that lean back. So the scale of opportunity actually still exists within the TV space, specifically into live TV, and followed closely by on-demand. Tablets, smartphones, computers, generally not as much opportunity, and the receptivity is a little bit lower because of really the context in which people are actually consuming that. Generally, they're using their mobile devices, they're using their computer to find other information. They're more task-oriented on those devices. Now, when we look at what actual kinds of content people are more receptive to, native generally seems to be a little bit more of a favored medium. Specifically, when you look at things like tutorials. Again, going back to the fact that consumers want to be able to get information, and if you're giving them something in return for their actual output, people are much more likely to actually gravitate towards it, and they actually, most of the time, are more receptive and notice it a lot more, especially when your brand is involved in that. Now, again, going back to the whole skippable thing, short of mobile app rewards, and I was having a couple conversations with a few of us yesterday about this one, and we were talking about, okay, of course, ad blocking is the devil, right? Of course, in this room, I would assume. Yeah, it was. I walked in here and I was like, wow, I was really surprised to see that Adblocker Plus would have showed up here. I was like, that's a lot of bravery to come in. But it's very true. And so when you look at what people are actually consuming and where they feel a little bit more positive towards, again, mobile reward is one of the largest ones that we see. People are actually getting something back for their time that they're spending, and people are more likely to actually gravitate and accept what your brand is willing to offer as long as they're getting something in return. It's not just something that they're actually forced to go through. And that really plays in with when you're looking at actual skippable pre-roll. Again, people can choose whether or not they want to consume your ad specifically when they have that chance to do it, and people are a lot more receptive toward it. And what we find is that, and we'll go through a lot more of this, but so I'll jump back really quickly. For the actual next part of the research, we actually looked at copy testing. And so what we did is we looked at this across a number of different devices. We took 20 ads in 8 different countries, about 10,000 consumers. And what we did is we understood in context, in things like Facebook and YouTube, how are people actually consuming, and what does that play in, and what are the key points to think about when you're actually serving that ad. So, not surprisingly, interest drops off very, very steeply within the first 10 seconds of the ad. So when you're thinking about YouTube pre-roll or the True View, it's really important to gather their attention in the first few seconds. After that, it trails off tremendously. And this is looking across all devices here. Now, skippability in that same context is really raising the bar. Now, what does it mean, and what is most important when you're thinking about how people consume? What you're looking at here is that people are looking for things that are funny and humorous. It gives them something in return. It's a category that they're interested in. It's something intriguing that happens in the first few seconds, and it's a brand that they're interested in. Now, at the very bottom of this, you're looking at things like tips and solutions. It's similar to something I've seen before. It's not necessarily as strong, and so what you're seeing is that skippability really puts the onus on the creative to be able to break through in that first few seconds to actually give that person something that's enjoyable and engaging, and you will oftentimes see a lot more receptivity and actually play all the way through. And this plays both in YouTube TrueView, but also in Facebook autoplay. So if there's something that happens within the first few minutes, what we're seeing is or the first few seconds rather, we're seeing that people are actually a lot more likely to continue through and to actually watch it, engage it, turn on the volume, and actually go through the entire experience. So we looked at a couple things. The first thing to do is to focus on skip resistance. These are 2 ads that we tested that kind of stood out to the top. Unfortunately, we can't click the videos to play, but what we're finding here is that, in these situations, people are actually engaging. If it's funny, if it's something that they like, within the first few seconds, that's more likely to actually go through. Now, if you don't have something that's engaging, I'm sure every single one of us has creative that's entirely engaging all the way through the entire roll. But if you happen to, or if you're thinking about, what are the best ways to optimize on that, the best thing to do is to make sure your branding connects in the first few seconds. I've done a number of studies for clients, and one of the biggest things we found is that a lot of times people want to kind of build on that, and they want to start, kind of engaging, and they don't necessarily want to encroach on the audience up front. But what we're finding is actually people need to see what that brand is right off the bat, because of the fact that they have the ability to skip through it. So if they're going to, you need to make sure that your advertising is going through and it's very, very quickly kind of realized. Now, on the bottom example here, so Magi was one where we saw the branding that came through early. It was an engaging ad, and people went all the way through. On the flip side of that, Purina Beggin', it was very, very popular. People liked the creative, but it was too long. And so when you actually look at it in that situation, over time, people actually do start to lose their overall kind of sensibility to it. So again, enticing your audience to engage. When you look at the actual behavior of Facebook click-to-play ads, let's say 10% actually do click through to play. As the video actually goes longer, you see that dropping off tremendously, and as the duration extends, it really starts to actually weigh on the person's receptivity. So again, especially when you're thinking about something like Facebook click to play, the first frame needs to signal, something that's rewarding or a creative experience. Two examples here are Heineken and HP. Both of those offered something, and we actually found that they were much more likely to have actually been clicked on because of the fact that there was something in return for that advertisement, and there was something that people felt that they were getting away from it, or they were taking away from it. So let's think about a couple creative considerations. The first one here, and we'll kind of step through these individually. The first one here is engagement. Again, even the best ads can be optimized across screens, so you have to understand and have to think about how that plays out across the screens. Your same TV commercial is not going to work as well on a digital format, and especially on a mobile format. You have to be able to then understand kind of how each of those play, and you need to optimize based on what screen you're going towards. Skippable and autoplay, again, the first few seconds count tremendously towards actual engagement. Click to play, again, it's all about impact. It's all about striking an intriguing image, draw the viewers in, and actually entice them to engage with you. Length, again, is a major component here, especially when you're looking in the digital space. It needs to be short, it needs to be sweet, get to the point, show your brand early, and give them what you're trying to do. And again, in the branding, don't hide it. It needs to come out immediately. Don't be afraid to put your brand out there. And more specifically, when you're thinking about optimizing across screens, that same, let's say, logo that's just on a product placement in the first few seconds of a TV commercial is going to work a lot differently than it is on a mobile device. If it's too small, if it doesn't stand out, people are not going to notice the brand, and they're not going to understand, and chances are you're probably going to lose that consumer within the first few seconds. And again, sizing. You got to make sure the logo is out there and it's standing out. Now, I think one of the most important things to think about with this is that receptivity is not just, it's related to effectiveness, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So brand impact, that kind of key nugget of effectiveness that we think about, is actually culminated by three different factors. One is the people, the reach. The second is the context, and that's where you really see the receptivity in media placement. But it's also about the content, and I think that's very important to keep in mind because the content is what people are actually going to consume, and the content is what's going to draw them in, and it's what's going to actually make them more receptive and more enjoyable ad experience. So kind of wrapping things up here, I think it's really important to think about right person, targeting matters. Beyond TV, so you have to think about how each of the different devices play into that overall conversation. Context, again, assume that people are going to be resistant. People are not going to want to actually consume. So you need to do something within the first few seconds. You need to make that ad something that's worthwhile for the individuals. And really embracing control. I think a lot of times, and the conversation has kind of gone to, well, where is the consumer in kind of the whole mix? We have to understand that people enjoy that control. They like to have that control over their experience. And individuals are much more likely to actually engage with you if you give them that control and you make it more of a mutual conversation. And then the right content. Again, work with the skip, understand that people are probably going to skip through it. There's very few occasions, and I think one of them was actually Call of Duty, was one of the actual ads that we've tested a number of times and has always risen to the top because of the fact that people are engaged with it. The first few seconds of it are very, very strong and engaging, and as it goes through, you start to see that build over time. So again, work with the skip, and then assume adaptation. Even the greatest ads can still be optimized a little bit more depending on what screen you're going to be going out on. Again, as I said, we have a lot more information on this one. I know I had to run through this pretty quickly in 30 minutes. This is probably only about half of the slides that we actually have in the full presentation. But I do encourage you guys to go through millwardbrown.com/ad reaction video. There's a lot of content there, and you can also download all the reports on the other 42 countries that we actually did the research on. Further reading, again, we have a lot more. This is kind of more of the brag slide. We have to add this in here. We have a lot more information as well that you guys can actually to go through and enjoy.
Travis, great. We have any questions? I had a quick. You didn't mention frequency, ad frequency, in terms of impact and reaction. Anything on how, on that?
Yeah, so what we find, and this really kind of goes across both video but as well as just standard display, frequency tends to be a very, very big point. Oftentimes what we see is that when a person is exposed more than usually about 10 times, the actual receptivity, both on the brand impact, but also their more across things like brand attributes, things like that, tends to drop off very, very steeply. While you will see that the actual engagement goes up and people do notice it more, they actually start to have a negative impact on the brand, especially as you get too high on that one. So you want to keep it within a reasonable range. There's a number of ways to think about that, but you have to also understand that that's across multiple devices. So the average consumer is not just seeing you on a digital space. They saw you in a commercial. They saw you on their smartphone. They saw you on their desktop. And you need to understand how all of those play together and look at the holistic view, especially when you look at things like frequency. So that 10 exposures actually, might be 3 exposures on smartphone versus 4 exposures on desktop, and maybe 2 exposures in an on-demand or on a live TV circumstance.
Yeah.
Hi, was there an engagement delta based on autoplay or non-autoplay across different devices? I mean, if the video started immediately, was the engagement higher or lower based on if someone actually clicked to play the video?
So you're saying between, so if it's just kind of like it just goes through, you have the standard 30-second pre-roll versus the click. Right. Oh yeah, definitely. The skippable is much, much higher engagement. People actually enjoy that a lot more. Even when you only have the first 5 seconds of it, people are actually a lot more attentive. They do recognize it much, much greater, and you're much less likely to kind of annoy them. And so I think that kind of plays into it, if I answered your question.
Do I have it right? There was something I misunderstood. On one of your charts, you showed that tutorial style content had almost off the chart receptivity, and yet on another chart it seemed like tips and hints and tip pre-rolls were skipped the most. Do I have that right? I'm trying to reconcile those two, because the first one was really impressive to me, that people recognize something that's directly helpful to them and they engage it more often, and yet the hints and tips pre-rolls didn't do as well.
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about tutorials, again, so kind of where you saw that actually going off the charts is when it's actually in the context of something that somebody wants to consume. So just having a tip from a brand that says, hey, here are 3 things that you should think about your credit score, might not necessarily be something that's engaging, but if that person is actually then, found on a site where they might be looking toward it, or maybe they're actually engaging with it, maybe they're on an auto site and they're looking for autos, and then you give them a few tips and things like that, that's where we find the actual differences. And it also can be things that might not necessarily be related to your brand. So it might be things that, especially when you look at tutorials, give them something else. So even stepping outside of your actual brand and looking at something that just might be important to that consumer in that specific time is actually something that you can really leverage in that.
Travis, thanks very much. Travis is going to be leading our roundtable that we're going to break to in a second on programmatic video. Listen, thanks everybody. Some great questions, great content over the last few days. Thanks to all of our speakers, presentations, keynotes, panelists, and moderators. Also,